Hi, this week we'll just give a few little ideas and clarifications of the Maimer of Basi Legani Tovshin Chafei. So for today, just a clarity. This might be simple to some people, but just important to clarify what this Maimer is actually based on. And it's based on the Chidush of the Frierdiker Rebbe in his Maimer about what it means that Ein Sof L'may L'mala Adin Ketz L'mata Mata Adin Tachlis. So there's actually, the Frierdiker Rebbe actually has a different way of learning in this Maimer. Normally the Pshat was always, or in many places, that Ein Sof L'mata Adin Tachlis means, the Frierdiker Rebbe explained also this in the Maimer, that even though the Oyer is Ein Sof and Bli Gvul, nevertheless it descends and is nisgale, it can be revealed and felt in an oifen of Bli Gvul, so that it comes all the way down, and this can manifest itself in different ways. For example, one of the ways the Frierdiker Rebbe explains is that it's the oil creates spheres adin ketz. That, before we actually have Seder Shlosh with the 10 spheres, there are infinite amount of spheres and so on. And then later on, the Maimer explains that it can come all the way down, even in places where it's like klippa and tumah and so on and so forth. For example, Pari says, "Li oiri ani asasini," the river is mine, and I made the river. And even there, Ein Sof descends and is able to create and can even be felt, like it says in other places that it means can be felt. There can be even be nisim, there can be revelation of a lakus in such places, and so on and so forth. But after all that, after it's all descending, we say l'mayla mayla adin ketz, which means that the Ein Sof remains bli gvul. It means it remains l'mayla adin ketz, so it remains in its complete, absolute bli gvul, and it remains transcendent and not really shaykhis to the places where it's nispashe, where it spreads to. However, the Frierdiker Rebbe explains it a bit differently in Ma'al Madin Ketz, and the Rebbe explains why. Because if you say this in a law like this, then because the Frierdiker Rebbe says that kashem, just like it's lemata mata adin tachlis, it's also l'mayla madin ketz. In other words, lemata mata adin tachlis is the same as l'mayla mal adin ketz. If we learn like we learned till now, in other words, that even though it's lemata mata adin tachlis, but the oil remains in its pure, unlimited, infinite state, l'mayla adin ketz, it means that the first of all, it means that's not really kashem. It's not the same. In other words, it's not comparable, because when we say Ein Sof L'mata Adin Ketz, we mean a chidush. We mean that the oil, so to speak, left its bli gvul and is able to descend to a place of complete gvul. Whereas l'mayla adin ketz means that it stays the same. And also, the Rebbe says that if that's the case, what do you mean that Ein Sof L'mayla Adin Ketz? The word L'mayla Adin Ketz is not moisiv, it doesn't add anything. Ein Sof means it's infinite and transcendent. So what are you adding by saying the word L'mayla Adin Ketz? And therefore, the Frierdiker Rebbe explains, and the Rebbe explains in this Maimer, that no, the pshat is like this, that the kashem means like this. Just like when we say L'mata mata adin tachlis, it means that the oil, so to speak, leaves its natural state. So natural, I'm using the word nature in a loose term. In other words, its default state. Its default state is Ein Sof, begolui, in a revealed way, and it leaves that default state and it descends all the way down. Kach, so too is the same pshat l'mayla adin ketz, that the oil leaves its default state and goes l'mayla adin ketz, which the Frierdiker Rebbe teaches is helem achar helem ilui achar ilui, which means it goes higher than its state of gilui, and it goes into the state of helem, it becomes incorporated, so to speak, and nisalem in the etzem, in atzmus Ein Sof. Why? What's the chidush here? That Ein Sof normally means that oir is gilui, oir is revelation. But l'mayla adin ketz means that the oir is so bli gvul that it's not limited to its tzir, to its geder, to its definition of gilui, and can even transcend it and even withdraw into a place which is higher than oir. In other words, that's l'mayla adin ketz, that it goes higher than what oir is normally. It goes higher, it leaves its default space into something higher, into the helem, into the concealment of where it's higher than gilui, i.e. the etzim. And that's the pshat kashem. Just like it leaves its default state to go down, so too it's able to ascend and go Helem Achal Herem and Ilui Achar Ilui. Ilui means it's an elevation, it's an improvement, sort of not improvement. In other words, it's a higher darga that incorporates itself into a place of Helem, into a place where it's higher than Gilui, because it's not fixed, it's not defined by the union of Gilui. Which the Rabbi explains, that's the idea of Tzimtzum, and that is that's the process which gives mokum, which gives a place, which gives a room, an opening for complete Helem down here. In other words, how do we have something here that we have complete Helem, where Hashem is completely hidden? It comes from that fact that the Maila Adin Ketz, that the oil goes to a place of higher than Gilui, and that's Helem, and therefore the oil expresses itself in a way of Helem, and therefore that gives a place for the union of Helem down here. Tomorrow we'll explain in which how that fits into the Hemshech of the different things that the Rebbe brings in the Maimer of Tavshin Chafei, like the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid, and so on. Following on the Maimer of Chafei, just an Inyan. So after, in Ois Beis, after the Rebbe brings the whole biur of what the Friedrich was Mechadish, that Maila and Tachlis means Helem Achar Helem, Ilui Achar Ilui. In other words, the Tzimtzum that we talk about, that gave room for Oilumus, for a world where Elokus is concealed, comes from the fact that the Oir was Nisalem. The Oir had the Koyach, as we said yesterday, to rise above the Geder of Gilui and to go into a state of Helem Batzmusai, which then gives room for Helem and therefore gives room for a Metzius, a Bria of Helem. He then brings the whole thing of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov has the whole beer of the Pasuk, Bereshis Bara Lakim, S, Aleph L'Tov, that the Eibishter was Nis Atif in Aleph, and then Nis Atif in Lo, then Aleph, and created Bria. And there was Chosev and Nis Atif, Gimel, Beis, and then he was Tov, which means he talks about over there the Dalad Meis Levushin, 400 Levushin from Aleph and Tov. So, what does this all have to do with the Maimer? But the beer is that, as he explained a little bit towards the end of this ois, the following: that we have Helem in the world could come really for two ways. In other words, it could be that it has nothing to do with oir. It could be that the oir is begilui, but there's something blocking the oir from a separate source, like kalim, for example. In other words, maybe lifting out Tzimtzum, there's two concepts. There's the koyach to block the oir. So, for example, if you have sunlight coming into a room, and then you put a blind blocking the sunlight, so it's something else, so to speak, blocking the sunlight, to make sure the sunlight does not come into the room. In other words, the fact that there's no sunlight in the room has nothing to do with the oil, nothing to do with the light. The light is being blocked, the light doesn't come there. Which is not what he explains over here in the Maimer. In other words, then the Tzimtzum would have something to do with something from a separate mocker, which the Eibishter has, as well as the Koyach of Gilui, and therefore that's why there's Helem, that's why we don't see the oil. But the Baal Shem Tov, bringing the Baal Shem Tov says no. The Helem comes because the Eibishter, the oil which was created from Ois Aleph, is Nisatif with Ois Beis and Gimel and then Tov and Dalad Meis Levushin and so on and so forth. In other words, it's all got to do with the oil. It's all coming from the oil. The oil itself is operating in a way where it's giving room for the Helem, for the concealment of Elokus. In other words, it's not because it's something else. Okay, there is also the union of Kalim, and Chassidus actually says that Kalim comes from Misavus Oir. Kalim itself is an outcome of Oir, as the Rabbi Rashab explains in the Mamorim and so on. So that's not for now to go into exactly the purpose, the function of Kalim. But the point here is that the Helem, that the concealment that we see in the world, actually has to do with the oir itself. Not that the oir is begilui, but it's being blocked to reaching this world. No, the oir itself is giving room for the Helem in this world because the oir is nisalem, is being raised to a level higher than gilui, which is Helem achar Helem, ilu achar ilui, which then gives room for the fact that it's not begilui here, and it gives room for the complete Helem vehester that we find in this world, as the Friedrich Rebbe explained in the previous Maimer. Just to also clarify something, so what's the difference then between Lamata Mata Alin Tachlis and Mail Mal Alin Ketz? Because in previous Maimer also talked about in previous Oisius, he also talked about Lamata Mata Alin Ketz, means that the oil comes down even to a place of Helem. But over there it's talking about more the Gilu. In other words, over there, the koyach of the oil is the kind of Lamata Mata Alin Tachlis, that the oil can come even to a place where there's complete Helem and there's a potential for Gilu there. In other words, for example of this would be the Nissim that happened in Mitzrayim. In other words, even though it's Mitzrayim and it's Liya Oir Vani Assassini and complete Hana V'Hester, nevertheless the Eibushter is Mizgalad there, so Oir can come all the way down. But here we're talking about how the Helam actually comes about. The Helam itself, or the Oir is not Begoli, that comes also from the Oir itself. It's not from a separate Inyan, it's not from a blockage, from a separate source. It's actually the Oir itself, which is Nis Atef in these Levushim, and that gives room for the Helam. And then he continues afterwards with the Magid's word about Shtei Chatzoy, which also has to do with this, because it's an outcome of the what we explained about Shem Tov, that the Oir itself is the source of the Helam, which we'll explain in Ritz Shem tomorrow. Kol Tov. Just a short idea today, following on from yesterday. So yesterday we explained that the reason that he brings in the Maimer, the Baal Shem Tov, is to emphasize that the Tzimtzum is part of the Oir itself. In other words, not something separate, like something else blocking the Oir of the Gilui, and therefore that's why the potential for an existence that where the Eibushter is completely hidden comes about, but rather no, it comes about because of the Tzimtzum of the Oir, Helem Machal Herem Ilu Achar Ilui, which was mislabish in all the way down to the top, the 400 Levushim, etc., as he explains there in the middle of Ois Beis. It all comes from the Tzimtzum itself, which then goes into the Magid. So the Magid, the Pasuk Ashtel Choshtei Chatzoytzres Kesef, that the Daled Mem, which is the person, and then the Aleph, which is the Eibushter, is all part of one equation. And he says that the person has to go through the person has to separate himself from all the Gashmis, until he goes through all the worlds. And then he'll be one with the Eibishter, and that's the idea of Shtei Chatzoytzres. So what's it got to do with it? How does it work over here? The Pshat is l'chayr like this, that once we know that the Tzimtzum, the Helem that exists down here below, the Metzius of Helem, doesn't come from something else, it's not blocked by something else. In other words, the Oir is the Oir, and the Oir is B'tachlis HaShleimus, B'tachlis HaGilui, but it's just blocked by Kalim or blocked by something else, a different Shorish, in order that it shouldn't come to us, shouldn't come to the place of Helem. Then what's the connection? And if you belong to the place of Helem, you belong to the place of Helem. But a yois that the Helem is actually a teitzah of the Oir itself. In other words, this that we have a Metzius of Helem down here, this that we see, we live in an environment where the Eibush is completely hidden, that's part of the Oir, that's part of what happened to the Oir itself. It is an outcome of the Oir, that since the Oir went through Tzimtzum, which Tzimtzum means L'may L'mala Adin Ketz, that it was Helem Achal Erem V'Hilu Achar Ilui. And that's what is giving room for the Helem. So therefore really it was all one equation. Norvos, the only thing is, we don't see it, we don't feel it, because we're in a Metzius of Helem, so therefore it's not Gilui. That's why he says it is possible to connect. If you go out of the Gashmias and you go through the Derech Lamaila, and you connect, and you become Odom, you become one thing with the Eibishter. Why? Because you're part of that Oir. You're part of that journey of Oir, you're part of that Gilui. In other words, it's still Oir. Even when the Oir is Helem Achar Hilu Achar Ilui, and giving room for the Metzius of Helem down here, it is still Oir, even though it's not defined by Gilui, and therefore is able to ascend to a higher level, which is higher than Gilui, into the union of Helem Achal Herem. But nevertheless, it's still Oir, which is giving room for the Helem, and therefore if you break through that Helem, you break through the Gashmis, you can become one and be the Odom, as he explains in this part of the Ois. Just a few words on the flow and the end of the Maimer. So the Rebbe goes into a whole thing about Tzimtzum, and how Tzimtzum didn't make any change by the Eibishter, as it says, Ani Havai Lo Shanisi. And part of the explanation is that in the Tzimtzum, as Chassidus talks about it, is only affects the Oir, not the Mo'ir, not the way the Oir is Behelem Achar Helem. In other words, how it becomes absorbed, so to speak, or incorporated in the essence of the Eibishter, because we know that there's no Tzimtzum altogether. As he explains the length of the Maimer, as it explains in Chassidus. And then towards the end, he also talks about the whole idea that this Maila Adin Ketz, Mata Adin Tachlis, all comes from the essence of the Eibishter, which is higher than being revealed or not being revealed. In other words, it's the Yechelis It's the potential that Hashem has to do anything that is completely undefined. And it all comes to the point of the end of the Maimon. And that is the whole idea of these oisius to explain Lamat Lamata Alin Pachlis and Lamay Lamad Alin Ketz is to get to the point of the oisar that we learned in the beginning in the Friedrich Rebbe's Maimer, in the second Maimer towards the end and the beginning of the third Maimer, that the whole idea of the creation of the world is to make a dir b'tachtonim, and the reason that the Yidden are called Tzivas Hashem is because Tzova is like an army, a soldier fighting the war and achieving victory, and victory Netzach has a shoirish, has a source that is very, very strong and very, very high in the neshama, and that when a king fights a war, he squanders his resources and he provides the oitzar, the treasure, which no one ever touched and no one ever could see and no one ever had access to it, and he gives that to the generals, but the point of it is for the soldiers. For the simple people to fight the war, iskafia and ishapche, to bring about the transformation of the world into a lakus, and to bring down a lakus over here lamata, and bring the shechina down here ultimately with Mashiach. And the way it's explained in the Friedrich Rebbe's Maimer, that the oitzer is that oyer, that light, but at the level of l'mayla adin ketz. In other words, that the oyer goes higher than, and is not defined by the idea of gilui, and it goes l'mayla adin ketz, which the Friedrich Rebbe explains is helem achar helem, and ilui achar ilui. In other words, it's an elevation of the oyer where it goes higher than the definition of gilui. That's the oitzer that is given to the soldier who fights the war. In some places, it explains the oitzer, but differently. In some oisius, it explains the oitzer as the essence of Hashem. Here, the oitzer is the oyer, but the oyer how it is incorporated in etzem, and for the oyer to go to that level of helem achar helem ila achar ilui, he says, comes from the koyach ein sof, the koyach of the essence of the Eibishter, ochein ato kel mistater. And we say, ochein, behold, you are a God that hides. And the Rebbe explains a beautiful thing, that kel is gilui, but ato means you use the essence of the Eibishter is higher than kel, higher than gilui, and that's the level in the oyer, that's the level of how the oyer becomes helem achar elem and ilu achar ilui. And that's the oitzer which is given to us. In the next Maimer, in the next year, Maimer Tosh Chavod, the Rebbe goes into an arichus to explain why we just can't say that the oitzer is the essence of the Eibishter itself, why it has to be the oyer in a way of Helam Achar Elam Gil Achar Ilui. But that's the pshat that he's learning here in the Maimer, and that's the oitzer. The Eibishter should help. We should be able to kochsach and learn the Rebbe's Mamarim, the Rebbe's Sichos, and the Ikar is we should be able to fulfill the dream of the Rashvi, which is bringing the Shechina of Yelamata B'Korav Mamish. Kol Tov.